I'm Byron Haskins, and I'm here with BJ Buckley from. You're in what? Where part of Montana now are you living?
I live in central Montana, about 30 miles west of Great Falls.
Okay.
And I live on Fairfield Bench, which is where they raise all the barley for your beer.
Ah, so at this point in time, I should reach for my beer
You
and
should.
show it. So, and we're having our virtual reunion this year because of COVID. And unfortunately, we're not going to all get together, but some of us are far flung like you are. I consider myself a little far flung, but you're very far flung. Uh,
Yeah.
and have you been back to Wesleyan at all since '76?
Yes, I was back. Oh my goodness, when that was. Somewhere in the early 2000s, I won a prize that included a reading on the East Coast. And so I went up and visited with Tony Connor, who was one of my professors when I
Oh,
was there.
okay.
Stayed about a week. So, but that's still a while ago.
We left Wesleyan in '76, and some of us went to New York, and other people went to DC and started political careers, and I came back to Michigan to go to graduate school at the University of Michigan. What did you do?
I went back to Wyoming and I stayed for about a year in Laramie, which is the university town there. It's about 50 miles from my hometown of Cheyenne. And I met a person who was living on a ranch up halfway between Sheridan and Gillette, Wyoming, 25,000 acre cattle ranch called the Seven Up. And he had a place there and invited me to share it. So I went up and I lived on that cattle ranch for 16 years before I met my husband. And then I moved up to Montana in a slightly less rural area than the one I lived in before.
Yeah, because you're from Cheyenne,
Yeah, I grew up in Cheyenne.
which is kind of like the Wild West.
No.
For
No, we had electric light in Cheyenne before Denver, also toilets
before Denver. Hey, all
before
right.
Denver. Yeah.
And they didn't get
The
up into the
railroad
mountains.
went through. Yeah. The railroad went through Cheyenne.
Why did you go back to to
Um,
to Wyoming?
Part of it was that my mother was still alive then and fairly elderly, and and my dad had passed away right before I graduated from high school. So she was living by herself. My sister had gone to college closer, but still out of town. And she and my sister and I had talked and thought, well, it'd be nice if I were somewhere closer. And I'm a Westerner. I like the sky straight ahead. I don't like crowds. I like the middle of nowhere. I like animals. And I figured if I needed to go back to the East Coast, I could always do that. But I went for the place and for my family.
Oh, okay. So how did you get to Wesleyan in the first place then? Because that's the,
Um,
kind of the opposite of Wyoming.
well, that's interesting. I went to the University of Wyoming for a couple of years. And once my sister was in college, I followed a poet that I liked to a teeny little college in New Hampshire and got accepted and moved and then told my mother, hi, I'm in New Hampshire now. And that was the year of the oil crisis. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and it was a little tiny campus in Center Harbor, New Hampshire. It was run on heating oil and they couldn't get any. They had no heat. So they closed it down and they sort of farmed all the students out to other New Hampshire colleges. What would you call it? A temporary basis, although it turned out to be a permanent one, unfortunately. So I went to the University of New Hampshire for a semester, knowing I didn't want to stay there and not really knowing what I wanted to do. And I had been good friends with Steve Miller, who is the class right
Oh
before
yeah,
us.
Steve Miller. Yeah.
You know, Steve, yeah. And I had met him the summer after I graduated from high school in Cheyenne. And that's another long story. But one of my classmates knew him and went back. And so I was just talking to him one night. I said, I don't know what the heck I'm going to do. Maybe I'll hitchhike to Europe. And he says, oh, you should go to Wesleyan. And I said, okay. And he said, he says, I'm going to email you the app. You do it. And I will carry it to the office. And so I did it. And that the application deadline was actually passed. And Steve Miller took my application into the office and said he wasn't leaving till they took me.
Amazing.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Steve is a good guy. I saw him in LA a few years back. We happened to be out in LA, and they were having a Wesleyan event, and Steve Miller was there. Yeah, so
Steve and Martha are both good friends, but I haven't seen either one of them in ages other on Facebook. But
yeah, and Martha happens to be the cousin of a friend that we have here in Lansing, Michigan.
oh, a small world. Yes,
So it's kind of amazing.
small world.
The what is it, the degrees of the 90
Degrees of separation. Yeah.
separation. Yeah, I started off by saying you're a fantastic poet, but you're also a very celebrated poet for things that are about your environment around you. And I really love your poetry, and that it's really descriptive. I can see and almost feel what you're describing by the way you write it. What are you working on right now, or is there anything going on right now
Um,
that we can expect?
oh, well, several things. A few years ago, I got back into some old journals from when I lived on the ranch in Wyoming. And I had a friend who sent me a book on prose poetry. I'm mostly a narrative poet. I like telling stories. And I thought, huh, this would be interesting. And so I started writing these little prose poems based on some of my journal entries. And then for the past 2 years, a friend and I have been writing back and forth poems every day of Lent and every day of Poetry Month, which assures that we at least get something down on paper for 60 days of the year, even if we don't have time otherwise. So I have some of those going. I always write a poem at Christmas, but lately mostly working on the ranch poems, hoping to get enough for a book sooner or later. My most recent book is a book of poems about crows, ravens, and magpies, which was in 2014 from Lummox Press in San
Yes.
Bernardino, California. And before that, it's 2004. A friend and I had a book in which each of us essentially had half the poems in a book through a small press in Wyoming. And then I have the usual writers 3 or 4 manuscripts that I send out, and then they come back with nice comments that say we really loved this, but and then I send it out again. So I have a couple of manuscripts circulating there. So they just sort of live in the ether. And I figure sooner or later someone will take them or not. But
Yes, I kind of went through some of that stuff with my writing too, and I got into a few journals, but I'm not that great of a writer, so I was very happy to get some publications out there. But you've won prizes with the Wyoming Arts Council, you got a fellowship with them, you've the Cumberland Poetry Review, Poets and Writers has your bio up, which I think is really
oh,
amazing.
nice.
That they have a nice bio up with you. You've had the Joy Harjo Prize from Cutthroat Journal, um, and stuff like that. So I'm just looking at some of your bio stuff there. So
Yeah, I've had pretty good luck getting poems published in journals. It's the full manuscripts that are hard to place because nobody buys poetry books.
yeah, no one buys poetry books, except for other poets, right?
Of the poets, yeah, we
Yeah.
buy.
Who was it? There's some poet laureate. I can't remember his name right now. It's just I'm having a senior moment. And his main line was that poets cannot survive on poetry. They have to do other things to eat. So what are you doing to eat? You know?
Well, I was trying to think, this would have been my 47th year. It got sort of, what would you call it, suspended by COVID, but I've been working in arts and schools and communities programs as a poet and writer in the schools since my 20s. I actually started at a little program at the library in Middletown that was called Eliciting Poetry from Children. It
Hmm.
was a little after school and Saturday program. But when I got back to Wyoming, I was on the roster and still am in several states. So I worked in Wyoming and Montana, North and South Dakota, Colorado. I worked in Alaska for a number of years, going into classrooms anywhere K through high school, writing poetry with the kids, doing handmade books, working in senior centers. I spent 8 years, boy, it's a long time, 8 years working as the writer in residence at Sanford Cancer Center in Sioux Falls through one of those programs, doing poetry and art with cancer patients, outpatients and inpatients there. And I worked at a museum in Great Falls under their arts program for 5 years, teaching mixed media art. I had the special needs Easter Seals classes. So I had those guys. I taught introductory clay, mixed media art. I did some handmade book classes, workshops, all sorts of stuff, paper marbling. So, and those are, sometimes it's feast or famine, but it's been enough to keep going and not have to get a real job for quite a while.
And so you're overall a really nice artist. In fact, when I was class secretary and I put out that we were bought an old house and we're restoring it and everything,
Oh
and
yeah.
and then in the mail comes this really nice work of art from you of a federal colonial style house that's been tatted, and I still have it. In fact, in this video, as we're talking about this, you're going to see a little pop-up of it, because we have it on a wall in our family room, and that's your work of art that we have hanging in our house.
Yeah, embroidery. One of the things I learned from my grandma and my great aunt. All
Yeah,
those useful
embroidery. Yeah.
things, crocheting doilies and making afghans.
And it's a beautiful, nice little work of art that we have on full display, and everybody says, "Who did that?" And I'd have to tell the story about my classmate Buckley, who's in Montana, and sent that to us. Very, very, very nice,
That was
very
fun.
nice gift. And one of the things that has come up in almost every single conversation in this series has been that favorite professor that kind of turned the light on or set the fire, or however you want to describe whatever metaphor that is. And yours was, you mentioned
Tony Connor. Yeah.
Tony Connor. And I'm going to try to find a picture of him and put it up.
Yeah, he's still there. He's like 91.
And he's still in Middleton.
Oh yeah, we're still in touch.
What was it about Tony Connor that made him special for you?
I was a philosophy and psychology major, but I had already determined that whatever I ended up doing for money, I was going to continue to write. And I had taken, I think it was an English poetry class for him, and realized that I could do an honors thesis in poetry. And so I asked him, and he said no. And I sat there and said, "That's the wrong answer." And he says, "No, it isn't." And I said, "Yes, it is." And I said, "I'm going to give you some things." And so I gave him some things, and he said, "Okay, we'll do this." And he set me some parameters, saying I had to do, I was a more or less free verse poet, and to be quite honest, not a very good one. And he set me some parameters of things I would have to do. And I said, okay. And I started doing them. He says, "I want to meet once a week." And I said, "Nope." I said, "I'll meet every couple of weeks when I've got something good." And he said, "Okay." We used to meet down at John B.'s.
Oh yeah, John B.'s. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
every once in a while down at John B.'s. And then I started babysitting for his kids. So I'd go over, babysit, I'd leave him a file of stuff, and he'd read it and he'd come back. So, but he was amazing. He pretty much let me do what I did, and then he'd send stuff back with comments and I'd fix it. And he once told me I was one of the few students who ever listened to anything he told them to do. But he was absolutely right, and he totally transformed the way I wrote.
And that sort of mentorship is what made Wesleyan special, I think, because
Yes.
I had Benjamin Brzezinski. I don't know, you were in the psychology department, you were in psychology
Yeah.
with me, but I had Benjamin Brzezinski, and he was just amazing because he understood the essence of experimental social psychology. We did the infamous experiment on students.
Yes.
In that class, and where we went into the library with three of us, one being an actor, one being a observer, and one being a Confederate. And we asked people for money for a phone call, and then we came back right in front of them and ate a candy bar. And then we observed their reactions, and then we did it a second time, just to see if,
Yeah.
and found out that 7 times out of 10, no one will do anything. And then we process that every weekly with him, what we were going through, and he debriefed us on how to see all the different signs of, and so
Yeah.
the mentoring, that's what I say. And I've heard other stories about other folks who have, from the Wesleyan experience, got organized in their thinking, and it changed their life.
Yeah,
So
and that was the other thing, is that when I went back to Wyoming, I did get jobs. I worked as a counselor in a home for mentally disabled adults. I did one-on-one vocational work with disabled adults when I go back. I had done some of that at Wesleyan through a couple of venues there. But having Tony sit there and said, "Yeah, you can write. All you got to do is practice and you'll get better," gave me when I finally decided that I was going to not do anything that wasn't associated with literature in some way. I had that in the back of my mind. It's like, yep, I can do this. And he was the reason.
so you've been writing poetry for 50 years, let's say,
Oh, since I was 6 years old.
since you were 6 years old.
Yeah.
So, 60 years. And there are a lot of people out there who write. They write a little poetry. They're like me. I wrote poetry ever since I was in elementary school. And I said, most of the time it would just get hidden because poetry is not cool, necessarily, unless you're writing songs, then
Yeah.
it's cool,
And it's cool.
especially if they're, poppy songs. When you're teaching kids art and writing and everything, what do you do? What do you say to them?
Um, I say that everyone's a poet, and it's unfortunate that school tends to beat that out of most people, and that poetry is one of the most profound ways to express who you are and what you think and what you feel. And sometimes it's good enough to get published, and sometimes it isn't. But the whole thing is doing it and enjoying it and having fun time and sharing it with people if you want to. And kids are amazing. They tell you the truth all the time in absolute clear terms, and it's a real challenge if you're a writer to come up to that standard, I think.
Yeah, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah,
Because you always want to do a little twist to something.
yeah. Yeah, and if they write a poem, it's their own. It's not like an assignment from somebody else. It's real. It's about their own life and their own thoughts and their own family, and how they see the world. And just to have somebody who has that tool for the rest of their lives, because as with any endeavor, only a tiny number of people are going to be really famous or get Nobel prizes or stuff like that. But if you make that a part of your life, it gives you a different perspective than the news magazine or the newspaper or the television. Well, I think everybody should come and see me on their way from one coast to another once travel is possible. I do live in the middle of nowhere. We were talking about moving to Wyoming. This little house that we have now is a 1937 kit farmhouse from when the area was first settled, and there was a big irrigation project that enabled people to grow crops here. It's the first time since I graduated from Wesleyan that I have running water and electricity. When I lived in Wyoming, I
Wait,
didn't.
stop. Say that again.
First time since I graduated from Wesleyan the last 9 years that I've had running water and electricity. So where I lived in Montana before we moved, where I lived in Wyoming, the old ranch house, there was an electric pole that had a pump for the water tank for the sheep, and you could run an extension cord inside, which we would occasionally. But I mostly lived with gas lanterns. I had a propane stove, I had a propane refrigerator, hauled all my water. And then we moved up to Montana, lived in a teeny little cabin in the woods, had little propane gas lights and gas stove, and hauled all our water. And so it's sort of nice to have stuff that just comes out of the faucet.
Yeah, the things that some of us take for granted, and I know if folks will be listening, they'll say, and I was complaining about my condo. You know?
The only thing I ever missed was sitting in the bathtub and reading trashy novels, you know. Other than that, you don't really need all that water coming out of your faucet all the time. Used to when it get hot in the summer, get back in the back part of the house where nobody could see you and get a wash tub and heat it up and just take the shower with the old, remember those solar showers from camping?
Yep.
Like hang in the tree, yeah.
Yep. So you've been living close to nature.
Very.
You have animals.
We have right now we just have barn cats, house cats, and dogs. When I lived on the ranch, I didn't have any, well, I didn't have any that were mine personally. There were times when I'd have anywhere from 8 to 19 bum lambs in my kitchen during lambing season. But I help with everything on the ranch. They had cattle, they had horses, they had sheep. And so whatever needed to be done, they'd come get me and we did it. So it's nice not to have responsibility for anything large that you have to feed every day other than the cats.
Yeah, horses and sheep and cattle.
My neighbors have all of those, so I'm not completely exempt with helping from it, but they're not mine. So
I live in a city, so I can walk to our state capitol. I can walk down the street, cross the bridge over the river, and go a few blocks, and I'm at our Michigan state capitol. And so I'm in the city, and I've lived in the city. I mean, Middletown was about as rural. I was in Wallingford. Wallingford's about as rural as as
you gotta
as
come see
that.
me. You definitely got to come west.
Yeah.
It's really funny. All these city people are fleeing to the west from COVID and paying way too much money for every house in shape. They have not seen a 30 below winter with howling wind for 6 weeks yet. So how long any of them are going to stay?
Yeah, how long will they last? Hey,
Oh man.
you've got a population growth there in Montana enough to get another congressperson.
See, they had two up until like 1990. I think we did have two, which is about when I moved up here, a little bit after that.
Oh, okay.
So, so
It's
it's nice.
Wyoming that only had one.
And still only has one. There are more antelope than people in Wyoming.
Yeah.
Yeah, people laugh at us, but I have a pantry in my basement. I can feed 4 people plus us for a year out of my basement.
Well, when you live out there, that's what I suppose that's what you have to do,
Yeah, just in case, because there's weather. I mean, everywhere has weather, but we have weather.
Yeah, I mean, when we have weather here, a snowplow comes down the street.
Yeah.
I just have to blow my driveway out. You have a poem for us, do you?
Yes.
To
Yeah, I
read?
do.
What's it? Tell me a little bit about it.
Um, let's see. I got two you can choose. I have one I wrote at Christmas a couple years ago. I had sort of an odd childhood. My dad was an Irish immigrant. We were his second family, so he was a good deal older than my mother. But he emigrated in 1921 through Ellis Island to New York, and my mother was born in Brooklyn, and so they were city people, and moved out to Wyoming. And my father never went back to Ireland. His sister, who still stayed in New York, did. Other family members did. He never did. But he sounded for my whole life like he'd stepped off the boat yesterday. And I'd never, while he was living, wrote very many poems about him. I wrote a number for him, so I have that one. And then there's the what it was like to lamb this year in mid-April with my neighbor during a hard cold front, which is not nearly such a fun poem. So let's read you the one about my dad. It's called Butter. The cats are on the table licking butter from my supper of stale discount bread, whole grain loaf passed over in this white bread town. It's nearly Christmas, and this memory from childhood, December, and real butter in defiance of the lack of cheese or meat. My father never shook the dust of Ellis Island from his shoes. Year's end, he pinched so on the holy morning we'd have oranges in the toes of our stockings and nuts in their shells, almonds and walnuts and filberts, Brazil nuts and pecans, and ribbon candy made by the Cockney man who had a tiny grocery, Greek cookies from Mrs. Panopoulos, whose first son had ended his own life years before my sister and I were ever born. My father drank his coffee half milk and so much sugar that even we with our Irish sweet tooths could barely get it down. I know from letters he wrote to Bridie, sister left behind and never married, that he longed for fish from the Shannon where it met the sea, for Kerry butter, which you can find now in every market as if it were nothing special. Those December dinners of whole wheat, thick spread with yellow, are what I most remember, more than the scrimped for ham and sweet potatoes, black olives and cranberry sauce in cut glass dishes, the good silver hidden all year under my parents' bed, next to the string-tied shoebox with the captured leprechaun from the old country, and the suitcase of graying photographs, the loved and lost whose names were faded as their faces. The cats are licking delicately their soft paws, their pretty whiskers, cleaning their foreheads and their ears. They smell of kibble fish and curry butter, of milk and wheat, a scent like the hands of my father, making us our suppers in the solstice dark, and then his thin, clear tenor that sang us off to sleep.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that one worked out pretty well. I'm happy with that one.
And so you have another one?
I do. Um, it should have a trigger warning, maybe. It's lambing is not a distanced activity. You're right there in the middle of stuff, and if the weather is bad, I help lamb out. Lambing out means you don't bring them into the barn. You're stout in the middle. Well, this wasn't as out as it was in Wyoming, but it was out, and we had an April here that was colder than January. So this one's called Lambing Hard Cold Front, mid-April. 48 frigid hours in a row, lambs fall bloody into wet fog and snow, twins, triplets, fast one on another, 100 ewes bleeding, mounds of afterbirth, earth churned to mud, dogs nervous and circling. Coyotes are out there, silent, waiting. And how quick we must be to sort out the dead, skin them to cover with sad, bloody shirts the rejects whose mothers nosed them away. We shove the impostors towards grieving ewes, crooning, here, here, here's your sweet one. Our jeans frozen dark and wet to our thighs, and our hands red ice, and the tired sheep tonguing wet lumps of wool till they wobble to stand, to nurse.
You know, the summer after I graduated from Wesleyan, I worked for the Boys Club,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I learned for the first time in my life to take care of a horse and to shear a sheep. We didn't do lambing because that was in June and July.
Oh, my
Uh,
goodness.
but it was quite an experience to deal with sheep. Your reading brought back a little bit of that memory.
Yeah, shearing is real work. It's a real skill.
It is real work, and I'm sure when I did it, I botched it up terribly, but it was our opportunity as staff to learn how to do those things so that we could talk about them with the kids, that were coming to camp. I thought that I would read something for you that I wrote. This is from a collection that I call The Fifth Horse. In the Chinese calendar, people who were born in 1954 are wood horses. And so I wrote it kind of celebrating my fifth 12-year cycle when I hit 60. So this is 6 years old. And it was about my house, because this is the house that we had gotten, that you sent
Yeah.
us the little the embroidery picture to celebrate. And this was one of my poems celebrating my house, and it's called My House. My house is full of music, written, played, wished for, performed on pods, guitars, drums, discs, screens. There is no control or power but for the chords, just dancing. No working around your anger or my happiness. My house is full, filled with invention, astral traveling, space-time contradictions, and the continuum of love. My house sends and seeks through an open door winds of time, lost chances, the dirty tracks of misfit interlopers who did their time, played, and gave the foot a tune to tap to. My house is moving now, slowly sliding down the mountain, passing through your town, crushing through the seawall, cruising the delta, heading out to the sound. My house is full of music.
Oh, you got to send me that one. That one's lovely.
So now we've read some poems and we've talked about what you've been doing, your amazing life. I don't think there's anyone, do you know of anyone in our class who has had an amazing life like yours? I don't.
Oh, I don't know. It's funny. When I got to Wesleyan, there was one person that I tracked down once or twice who was from Colorado. And gosh, can I remember Moira something? And we kept in touch for a little bit, but it's a long time. I know she went back west somewhere too, at least for a while, but I haven't been in touch with her for years. But
More,
everybody I talked to has had different kinds of amazing lives, I think.
well, Carol Bellhouse, who I collaborate on some of the music videos, she gets the actors and does a script
Yeah.
and writes a poem. And then she needs music to go with it, and she draws on my music, or I've actually scored a couple of her. And she's in um, Leadville, Colorado,
Oh yeah.
way up in
Way
the
up.
mountains. There are very few who have gone and lived the challenging life of being out in the wilderness, and taking what we've learned to the wilderness, and apparently you've done a really fantastic, amazing life of sharing what you learned at you know uh, in New Hampshire and in Connecticut back to North Dakota, Wyoming,
Montana,
and and uh, and Montana, among other places.
among other places.
It's been great. I know you got to get out of there. Uh, you're in the you're what library are you sitting in right now?
I'm in Fairfield Public Library in Fairfield, Montana, which is about 14 miles from my house.
And you do classes there?
Mostly I tease them it's my office. I don't have internet at my house, although I can get connections on my cell phone. So they're very gracious with putting up with me coming in and doing my typing up all the stuff I write and printing it out on their printer. And they've been very kind. I'm very
Libraries are good for that. That's
Yep.
one of the great things of libraries that have spread across the country is that we have those places to depend upon.
Yeah. See, if the weather were a little better, I could have sat outside. They're really nice. Their Wi-Fi signal's pretty high, but we have one of those windy days.
Yeah. Well, I have this great background of Wesleyan behind me, but you have a real background of the library room that you're sitting in,
Yes, that's the
real books behind you.
real books behind me.
And I think that's perfect. It's been great. We'll hope that we'll see you in person. We can make a date to get you and a lot of people there for the Big 50, which is the final, real reunion that you ever have.
I'm planning on it. Yep, and we'll all really be old and gray.
Yeah, we'll all be talk about, we'll all be retired somewhat, though writers never retire until they stop writing, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they don't.
Okay, BJ, it's been great. It's great reading poetry with you. We'd never done that before.
Nope.
And we'll see you in 5 years.
All right. Take good care.
You too. Bye now.
Bye now.